With 39 members in the chamber and a quorum being present, the Senate of Maryland is back in session. Let's go ahead. We've got 3 calendars, some special orders, so we'll see. We'll do the best we can. If we have to push till tomorrow, that's fine too. All right, we have, this is report number 5 from Education, Energy, and the Environment. Do we have, okay. Report 5, clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 7, Senator West, Environment On-Site Wastewater Services Board, Fees and Penalties, favorable.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 35th is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 7 is an emergency bill that makes updates and technical changes to the licensing regime for on-site wastewater service providers, which was established by legislation last year. Specifically, this bill alters the composition of the State Board of On-Site Wastewater Professionals and directs certain administrative penalties to the Maryland Clean Water Fund. The bill also clarifies the application of licensing requirements and the distribution of licensing fees. There was no opposition at the bill hearing, passed out of committee unanimously, and no amendments. So I'd like to move for adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 7 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 35, Senator Kagan, Open Meetings Act, State Ethics Commission, Maryland State Agency Transparency Act of 2023, favorable with 2 amendments.
Chair recognizes the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, before COVID, during the pandemic, and now since, this body has worked to make our government more transparent and more accessible. This is the latest and probably the last agency or department that needed to be required to post their agenda and meeting materials 48 hours in advance, to live stream the meeting, and to keep the video and post the minutes within 48 hours, within 2 business days after they've been approved. The Ethics Commission was fine with this. I just want to reassure you that anytime any of these agencies, including this one, goes into closed session, they obviously do not have to stream. There are 2 modest amendments. One changes the effective date from October 1st to July 1st. We might as well get a couple more meetings in there. And second, they just asked for permission that DoIT, the Department of Information Technology, will support their live streaming and any other electronic information that they need. With that, move the favorable report as amended.
All right, excellent report. Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments in the favorable report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections to the 2 amendments? Without objection, the 2 amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 35 is ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 91, Senator Bailey, Natural Resources Apprentice Hunting License Alterations, favorable.
Chair recognizes the senator from Howard County as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, this is a simple bill that allows a youth hunting apprentice to renew for a second year to continue learning from their parents, guardians, and mentors. Specifically, Senate Bill 91 authorizes the Department of Natural Resources to issue an apprentice hunting license, which is generally non-renewable, to a person who has previously been issued an apprentice hunting license if the person is younger than the age of 17. An applicant for a second or subsequent apprentice hunting license must repeat the required department-approved electronic course of instruction and competency in firearms and hunter safety. I move for the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 91 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 124, Senator Hester, Maryland Food Systems Resiliency Council, favorable with 1 amendment.
Chair recognizes the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, you may remember 2 years ago we established the Maryland Food System Resiliency Council. At the end of that 2 years, the council was to come back and to offer recommendations on where it should be officially established. And so Senate Bill 124 establishes the existing Maryland Food System Resiliency Council in the Office of Resilience within the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. It specifies that MDEM must provide staff for the council. The bill repeals the requirement that the elected co-chair of the council be one of the 5 food council organizations represented on the council. The bill also makes technical changes reflecting the recent establishment of MDEM as the principal department of the executive branch. There is one committee amendment that adds co-sponsors. There is no fiscal impact. I move for the adoption of the amendment and the favorable committee report.
All right, floor leader moves to the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. Any discussion on the amendment? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now is on the favorable report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 124 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 246, Senator CAROZZA, WICOMICO County Sanitary District Authorization, favorable.
Chair recognizes the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Senate Bill 246 is an important local bill. It simply allows WICOMICO County to be authorized to set up a sanitary district, which allows it to move forward with its sewer and water plan. There was no opposition, no amendments to the bill. I'll move favorably.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 246 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 263, Senator Jackson, Maryland Higher Education Commission, Access to Mental Health Advisory Committee Establishment, favorable with 2 amendments.
Chair recognizes the senator from Prince George's as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill establishes the Access to Mental Health Advisory Committee within the Maryland Higher Education Commission to study and make recommendations regarding the provision of mental health services at institutions of higher education by December 1st, 2023, and each year thereafter. MHEC must report its findings and recommendations to the governor and specified committees of the General Assembly. There are 2 committee amendments. One adds co-sponsors. Amendment number 2 makes changes to the staff of the committee and requires a single report be submitted by December 1st, 2023 instead of an annual report. Move adoption of the amendments and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections to the amendments? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 263 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Let's go ahead and do the things where we have as many people here as I think we're going to have. If we could do a quorum call before third reading calendar.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their presence? So the clerk will take the call. With 45 members in the chamber and a quorum being present, the Senate of Maryland remains in session. This is third reading calendar number 9. Number 9, clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 54, Senator Lamb, Criminal Law, Unnatural or Perverted Sexual Practice, repeal.
Senate Bill 54 is on third reading for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 34 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 54, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 68, Senator CAROZZA, Law Enforcement Officers Pension System, Crisfield Police Department.
Senate Bill 68 is on third reading for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 45 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 68, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 114, Senator Hayes, Property Tax, Real Property Tax Rate Increases, Notice Requirements.
Senate Bill 114 is on third reader, final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 45 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 114, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 189, Senator Rosa Pepp, Maryland Saves Data Sharing Act.
Senate Bill 189 is on third reader for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 45 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 189 having received a constitutional majority is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 235, Senator West, School Building, Solar, and Geothermal Technology.
Senate Bill 235 is on third reader for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 44 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 235 having received a constitutional majority is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 282, Senator King, Maryland Forestry Education Fund Establishment.
Senate Bill 282 is on third reader for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 45 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 282 having received a constitutional majority is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 305, Carroll County Senators, Carroll County Public Facilities Bond.
Senate Bill 305 is on third reader for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 45 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 305 having received a constitutional majority is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 312, Senator Zucker, Tax Clinics for Low-Income Marylanders Funding Repeal of Sunset.
Senate Bill 312 is on third reader, final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 45 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 312 having received a constitutional majority is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 328, Senator Heddleman, Board of Public Works, Public Comment Act.
Senate Bill 328 is on third reader for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 45 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 328 having received a constitutional majority is declared passed. All right, we have a special order. This is special order number 10. Clerk will read the report.
Executive Nominations Report Number 3, Nominee Number 5. Question is, will the Senate advise and consent to the nomination of nominee number 5?
All right, question before the body is on whether the Senate will advise and consent to nominee number 5. This is one of the secretaries. Chair recognizes the minority whip.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to take a moment to explain why I'll be opposing this nominee. Maryland, and it's all of us that represent our communities, we've seen that the entire state, there's a crisis in juvenile crime, juvenile criminal activity. I did some digging and some research, and since 2019, we've had hundreds of juveniles that have been involved in shootings, just in shootings. Nearly 100 juveniles have been killed since 2019 in these shootings. And we're seeing an unacceptable level of criminal activity and violence, both perpetrated by juveniles and done to juveniles. And you know, a lot of attention has been paid to issues in the city of Baltimore, but it's really happening all over our county, all over our state. I've got examples here, and I won't belabor it for too long. We've got examples here from things that have happened in Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County, Montgomery County, Harford County. And my concern with this nomination is that it seems to be furthering the policy choices that we've made here that have helped to put us in this situation. You know, I've got some quotes. There's been something in the news recently about shootings, the Deonta Dorsey and his family. There was a quote from a member of the Coldstream Homestead Montebello Community Corp that they were doing a walk and doing a vigil, and This person was quoted saying, "We have our youth out here unleashed and unsupervised. With this generation coming up, if we don't catch them, they're gone because they're only getting younger and we're getting older." You know, in Montgomery County, there was a young juvenile victim assaulted outside of a school by other juvenile victims. And the quote from the police department was basically the juvenile was just in a field behind a middle school and several other juveniles approached him and just hit him and stole his property. In Anne Arundel County, we had 2 children in the last month bring guns to schools. And so there's these awful and scary statistics, but they're not just numbers, they're real lives and they're real people. And we can't keep doing what we've been doing in the area of juvenile crime. We can't double down on more failed and dangerous policies. You know that the number of juveniles that have been murdered this calendar year is double the number of juveniles murdered in all of 2021. And we're only in the middle of February. And the concern that I have and many of us have expressed in the past here as we've talked about this particular nomination is it seems that the focus of this nominee and of our criminal justice policy in this state has more and more become all about making sure we're not being too tough on the offender. It's all carrots and no sticks. What about the victims of crime? What about the communities that are being ravaged? And what about the young people? When we talk about juvenile justice, oftentimes our focus in public has been on, as I've just talked about, some of the worst offenses, and also the very young people. And we've talked about how now we've got issues with what we need to do about very, very young people. We don't want them incarcerated, but at the same time, there need to be consequences, and we're having that debate. My concern, and my colleague to my right here has shared this before, is the people in the middle of the bell curve that are involved in the juvenile justice system, the ones that have started to have some offenses, but it's not too late before they get to the place where we really can't do anything to help them because they've done something so terrible that they have to spend time in jail. What about those kids? And from my perspective, I can't say it any better than the Prince George's County executive back this past summer in response to doing a curfew said, these kids don't just need a hug, they need to be held accountable. And unfortunately, the things attributed to the current nominee and frankly the entire attitude around this issue that we're seeing has been one was not an attitude, it's we need more hugs. We need more wraparound services. And none of us are against making sure we get more services for these kids that are just entering the system. And we want the system to work better. And we know that there's some reform ideas that we want to continue working on that. But there has to be accountability, and there has to be some sticks to go with the carrots. And that's not happening right now. And my fear is that this is throwing gas on the fire. It's just continuing this idea that, you know, the idea of accountability, the idea of, when I first learned about the term restorative justice, I remember it was, we want people to get a second chance. We want to restore them to the community. But they have to make amends. And it's part of that whole process. And we've lost that. We've lost the making amends part. So I really believe that this is an opportunity and a point where we have to stop and say, this is going too far, to give the administration and say, we want to work with you. We think this is a mistake. And we want to try to pull it back and say we need more balance in our system. We need more balance in the idea that people are going to be held accountable for what they're doing, and not just that, hey, we want to restore people. Well, we do. But if they don't learn from their mistakes, if we're only giving hugs and no accountability, they're not going to learn. And so young people need discipline and structure. And so the concern with this nomination is that we're not going to get that we're going to get more of the failed policies that we've seen. And frankly, the failed policy has been tried in some other places. More of the failed policies of accommodating, being concerned we're being too hard on the young person that's committed the crime, as opposed to being concerned about their actions and accountability in the victims. So, Mr. President, reluctantly, I'm going to say I'm voting against this nominee. I do believe the governors have the right to pick their people, and it's our job to vet and vet those nominations. But I will be voting no, because I believe we have to send a message. We have to get serious about what's happening on crime, especially with dealing with juveniles in this state. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes Chair of the Judicial Proceedings Committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be voting in favor of this nominee, and I'll just explain a little bit why. I fully appreciate the concerns that were raised by the senator from Carroll County, but I'm really tremendously proud of the reforms that we've done in the last couple of years, and a lot of the reforms won't bear immediate political fruit, right? So it takes time for change to happen systemically. But we also have to understand that there are short-term operational goals and challenges and long-term strategic challenges. The reforms that we've just tried to handle both. And this nominee has had tremendous success implementing those short and long-term goals in Chicago and Washington, D.C., and here in Maryland. He's a blend of both vision and technocratic skill. Now, I'm supporting this nominee, but I do have words of caution for this department and for this nominee. A lot of our reforms and the success of those reforms and the continued reforms that we're looking at even this session are contingent on the successful operation of this department. And this department is not functioning the way it should. And let's just say it plain and let's read it into the record. This department faces major challenges, and the success of the reforms that we're looking at in committee right now depend on this secretary performing at a high level. One example of this is we had a bill that was withdrawn from committee and from consideration. We should have heard it this week, which would have essentially said that the department could absorb some of this population that we're talking about in the juvenile system, giving them those services, holding people accountable, and it was withdrawn. And so we are deprived of an opportunity to have that robust discussion about the challenges facing the department. That's a cautionary tale, and it's our responsibility to exercise that oversight and hold people accountable. So to the incoming secretary, I fully support you. Your record has been sterling. You have provided vision and technocratic skill. Please, please, please apply it to this department because it needs the help. And our reforms in the future depend on your success. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Any further discussion? Yes, Chair recognizes the Senator from the Lower Eastern Shore.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'll be brief. And I do also rise reluctantly to vote against this nominee. And as someone who has served in the executive branch, I take that and my role on executive nominations very seriously. It goes back to my colleague's point about the balance. And we all know the news. The 16-year-old charged with murdering Deontay Dorsey was on juvenile probation for a prior gun charge when police say he opened fire on a crowd of students across from Edmondson and Westside High School. The family held a press conference yesterday, and the family was fired upon last night. I go back to balance, and I think all of us in this chamber accept the responsibility that public safety is our job number one, no matter what committee we serve on. That has to be job number one. And when I'm listening to my constituents, and I would say people across the state of Maryland, there's just a sense that we're out of balance right now, that the focus on the reforms that the chair spoke about have been focused on rehabilitating the offender. There's also the balance of protecting the general public. And when we talk about the balance, I think that we have to, as we look at these reforms, there should be a focus on what we're going to do with violent juvenile offenders, and that's a different category. And so when I did ask my questions during the executive nominations hearing on what the specific plans were for violent juvenile offenders, I was not satisfied with the response. But as the chair said, at this point. So that is the reason why I will be voting no, and it's about the balance, and it's about the deep concern with the increased spike of violent juvenile crime across the state, and knowing that we need a plan for violent juvenile offenders. I appreciate the time to share my view. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Yes, Chair recognizes the Senator from Prince George's.
Thank you, Mr. President, and to the work of your great committee, my seatmate. I do rise to support this Secretary. Before coming back here, I was here for 16 years, and I worked on juvenile justice issues and everything that dealt with that department. And I rise because, without going in detail, I was one of those kids. I did have wraparound services. Had I had one day in prison, I'm sure that's the way I would have gone. But by the grace of God, I'm here. I want to support our chairman in saying the time that I was here, I had great concern and many controversies with the prior secretary, who is a good person. We just had, as you said, we could do better. I'm hoping in giving my vote that I too will be able to join with others in saying we will hold him accountable for what he does. I'm looking for, from what I know about him, I believe that he will. I'm looking forward to talking to him, and I want to rise and say I support this nominee. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any further discussion? If not, question before the body is, will the Senate advise? Chair recognizes the Senator from Baltimore City.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also wanted to rise in support of the Secretary. I just wanted to say to my colleague, it was very refreshing to hear when we talk about Baltimore safety, public safety, Mr. President, that it's not just Baltimore City, that we're talking about these are real issues that are happening across the state of Maryland. So I'm glad that this was acknowledged from that standpoint. And then I think that it's important to recognize that this is a multi-pronged approach. This is a multi-pronged approach. This is not just a public safety issue, but the reality is that we always did not have bodies that reflected the diversity of our great state of Maryland, which is why some of the decisions were so slow when we talk about mental health, when we talk about education, when we talk about the poverty issues, the minimum wage, so many things that reflected that, but it wasn't in close proximity with the communities that needed it the most. Then I think about that accountability piece of it. I think about that accountability piece of it, and it's very real. As I engaged in conversation with the Secretary, I talked about the after action, not just from the shooter, but also the victim. A lot of our victims, a lot of times, are juveniles, and how are we handling those types of issues? I also talked about the education component. When you are in one of our facilities within DJS, what does the education look like that you're receiving? What are some of the resources that you're going to be receiving from that standpoint? What are some of the partnerships that our Secretary is going to bring to us? I think that just like my colleague, I'm cautious, but like if we move in the right direction from that standpoint, if we think about that diversity, if the folks that are in close proximity to some of the issues that are happening, as was mentioned with Chum just does not have a public safety issue. Chum just does not have a challenge with juveniles. Chum has issues with economic development from the housing standpoint. They just got a new school that was rebuilt, some of the work that we did with 21st century schools. It's a multi-pronged approach that's going to get us there, not just the DJS component. That's one piece of it. And I look forward to working with the next Secretary, Mr. President, but also thinking about that multi-pronged approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any further discussion? If not, question is, will the Senate advise and consent on the nominee? The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote? Chair recognizes Senator from the 42nd District has 2 minutes to explain his vote.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I've always made juvenile justice one of my priorities. The members of this body who were here 2 years ago may recall that I was the sponsor of the Juvenile Restoration Act. We passed it, the House passed it, the governor vetoed it, and on one memorable evening I had to stand at my seat and urge the body to overturn the governor's veto. I also was a member of the Juvenile Reform Commission for several years, so it's always been a priority of mine. When the concerns about this nominee were raised, as the ranking Republican on the Judicial Proceedings Committee, my expectation was that the nominee would contact me and set up a time to sit down and talk. I would have welcomed the opportunity to chat with Mr. Schiraldi. Unfortunately, he didn't do that. We can't resolve any of our differences unless we sit down and talk them through. And in this case, this didn't happen. So I'm voting no to send a message to Mr. Schiraldi that in the future, he's not going to be operating all by himself. he needs to operate in concert with the Maryland General Assembly, and particularly with the Judicial Proceedings Committee in the Maryland General Assembly. So my hope is that in the future he takes this message seriously and he works cooperatively and productively with us to pass legislation of importance. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any further senators wish to explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 33 votes in the affirmative, the Senate advises and consents affirmatively to nominee number 5. All right, I think we're going to call it there. We still have some work left to do, but we can leave it for tomorrow. We have a light day tomorrow, so we'll just push it till tomorrow. Let's do committee announcements. Chair recognizes the Chair of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Finance will continue bill hearings today at 1 p.m. in the committee room.
All right, 1 p.m. Chair recognizes the Chair of Education, Energy, and the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Triple E Committee will meet at 1 p.m. for 11 bill hearings, followed immediately thereafter with a voting session.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair recognizes the Chair of Budget and Tax.
Thank you, Mr. President. 1 o'clock bill hearings, 2 o'clock Capital Budget Subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair recognizes the Chair of Judicial Proceedings.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Judicial Proceedings Committee will meet today at 1 o'clock for bill hearings.
All right. Any select committees? Delegations? Other announcements? Chair recognizes the Senator from Prince George's for our Black History Month.
Thank you, Mr. President. Was it afternoon yet? Good morning, colleagues. You know, Langston Hughes said that freedom is the icing on somebody else's cake, and so it shall be until we learn how to bake. I'm pleased to stand before you today and speak about a group of black men rarely discussed, but who played an extraordinary role in black history, the history of our country, and the Underground Railroad. These were black seamen known as the Blackjacks. These men who sailed and worked in the maritime industry used their knowledge to not only free themselves from slavery, but also to free others, create wealth, and advance black culture. They opened a new path to education and liberation through the sea. Let me break this down for you. This is one of the most fascinating but often overlooked aspects of black life in the 19th century, and that of the Underground Railroad. The overwhelming number of documented escapes via the Underground Railroad were those slave states whose border is directly connected to a free state. Maryland and Virginia's connection to Pennsylvania, Kentucky's connection to Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. In truth, escaping slavery in the southernmost slave states like South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi were rarely resulted in success. It was very difficult to escape long distances overland through a hostile territory, which was the slaveholding South prior to the Civil War. But if you could get on a northbound vessel, a sailboat going from a southern port to a northern port, you could be in a northern port in a number of days, even from a port as far south as Savannah and Charleston. During this time, thousands of ships traversed the eastern seaboard, carrying all sorts of products like sugar, cotton, tobacco, wood, and if properly exploited, provided an important component to escape via waterways with the help of a trained seaman. Almost 20% of American mariners or seaborne workforce were people of color. And to understand the ability to escape from the far south to the north by waterways, I need to speak about the waterfront workforce. Outside of plantation work, these folks were skilled laborers, waterfront dock, wharf workers, longshoremen, stevedores, who were loading and unloading vessels and figuring out the trim of vessels so they could be sailed, warehousemen, drovers, and teamsters who would bring provisions and supplies, even very skilled labor like caulkers and riggers. Even though their wages had to be turned over to their owners, they were gaining extraordinary skills, working on the vessels and learning how the waterfront works, the rhythms of the sea, and the rhythms of the port function, which allowed them to parlay that knowledge into opportunities to escape. They were not only working on land, but also watermen aboard the vessels themselves, fishermen, ferrymen, the lighters, those responsible for loading and unloading vessels that are at anchor or on moorings in the harbors of the South. They were also deckhands and even pilots who understood the hazards of navigating the southern waterways. So much of the enslaved labor were highly familiar with seaborne skills, in addition to being the stewards, the servants, the musicians, and the cooks aboard ship. In fact, literacy was also taught to those who set sail. The aft cabin of a ship typically had books, charts, maps, and navigation instrumentation. These skills, as you can imagine, were very valuable to a slave owner who feared their slaves interacting with these free seamen as they came to port. Ordinances and laws of the far South moved to restrict the movements of northern free blacks and keep them from spreading information to those enslaved. In South Carolina, this was the birth of the Negro Seamen's Act of 1822, which was adopted by many southern states. This act was designed to prevent the local slave population from revolting against the authorities. As a result, free black sailors entering the ports were apprehended upon arrival to prevent them from spreading ideas of revolution and freedom to local slaves. Often they were restricted to the port and sometimes incarcerated for the duration their time the ship was in the port. The Underground Railroad was not only about the transportation of people, it was also about the transportation of messages, secret messages from free blacks in the North through these sailors to families in the South to let their families know they were safe. There was one man in particular who stands out for his contributions and maritime skills, Robert Smalls. In 2004, Maryland Congressman Elijah Cummings honored Smalls by naming an Army vessel after him in the Baltimore Harbor. Smalls' story is a testament to the power and knowledge and determination. As an enslaved crew member in Charleston, on board a ship called the Planter, Smalls spent months studying the functions of the ship and the roles of his crew during the Civil War. One night in 1862, while the crew slept on shore, Smalls unanchored the ship and sailed off to meet his family members. He was aware of the Confederate checkpoints that the ship had to pass in the Atlantic off the coast of Charleston and used his knowledge of the required flags and procedures to pass each checkpoint successfully. He even dressed himself as the real captain of the Planter, imitating his mannerisms to ensure a smooth escape. Smalls was a blackjack who eventually became a politician, winning election in South Carolina legislature of the United States House of Representatives during the Reconstruction era. He also authored legislation providing for South Carolina to have the first free and compulsory public school in the United States. This story, as well as that of Matthew Henson, the Charles County native who went to sea as a cabin boy, ultimately made it to the North Pole with Robert Peary in 1909, shows the value of these seafaring men. In closing, we all know the story of our own Frederick Douglass. Born into slavery on the eastern shore of Maryland, and as a child grew up in the Chesapeake Bay. And one day, while viewing the ships in the Chesapeake, he said, "You are loosed from your moorings and are free. I am fast in my chains and am a slave. You move merrily before the gentle gale, and I sadly before the bloody whip. You are freedom's swift-winged angels that fly around the world. I'm confined in bands of iron. Oh, that I were free. Oh, that I were on your gallant decks and under your protecting wings. Alas, betwixt you and me, the turbid waters roll. Go on, go on. Oh, that I could also go. Could I but swim, if I could fly, oh, why was I born a man of whom to make a brute? The glad ship is gone. She hides in the dim distance. I am left in the hottest of hell of unending slavery. Oh, God, save me. God, deliver me. Let me be free." In thinking of a time when the Chesapeake Bay would provide his freedom, his master sent him to a Baltimore shipyard where he learned to caulk ships and he learned to read. He ultimately finds a black sailor in Maryville who offers to give him his Seaman's Protection Certificate. It defined the bearer as a citizen of the United States. This seaman, this blackjack, risked 7 years in prison to give Frederick Douglass his certificate. Frederick Douglass dresses as a sailor, gets on a train from Baltimore, Philadelphia, and when the conductor comes down the aisle asking him for his free pass, asking the blacks for their free pass, he says, "I don't have a free pass, but I have my certificate with the American Eagle on top. I can go wherever I want to go around the world." I contend that the Frederick Douglass we revere today, the abolitionist, the journalist, the reformer, would not have been possible had it not been for that group of black men, both slave and free, known as the Blackjacks. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you. That was really good. That's great. Well said, Senator. I'm embarrassed to say I had not heard black checks as a category. It's fascinating. Great reflection. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that with us today. A bit of a chair recognizes the executive board member of the Black Caucus.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask that his remarks be journalized.
Without objection, we will certainly journalize the remarks, and if we could just get a copy of those remarks too, sometime today, so we can add it to the record. Thank you very much. Perfect. Yes, chair recognizes the senator from the Lower Eastern Shore.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess along the themes of our blackjacks and seafarers and maritimers, we have some guests from Worcester County. Today is Maryland Economic Development Day over at the Calvert House. And today up in the gallery, we have guests from Worcester County, Melanie Purcell and her team, if she'll stand, and if you'll greet her from Maryland's coast.
Wonderful.
And all those magazines that you see around the campus, Maryland's coast, come from this office, so come down and visit. Thanks for visiting up here in Annapolis.
Thank you for being here. Thank you. Great to see you all. Also tonight at 6 o'clock, CSG East is hosting a reception. I was asked to make sure to pass it along. It is at Harry Brown's at 6 o'clock. This is CSG East, so one of the great organizations that we're a part of as part of the legislature, and they provide some phenomenal information. Anything else for the good of the order? If not, let's do a quorum call before we adjourn.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their presence? If so, the clerk will take the call. With 45 members in the chamber and a quorum being present, the Senate of Maryland remains in session. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate of Maryland stand adjourned until Wednesday, February 22nd at 10 a.m.
Without objection, so ordered. Have a phenomenal day.